Hello and welcome to the next in a series of Compass meetings where the Chief Constable and I meet. I ask her questions on your behalf and test her on topical issues, and she responds and gives you a sense of the operational stance that a Chief Constable is responsible for in connection with the priorities that you, the public, have and the challenges she faces, but recognising the issues that you would like her to address and to give you a real understanding of those pressures, particularly at the moment where money is tight, where operational demand is high, and where we all need the professionalism of the Hampshire Constabulary, led by the Chief Constable, to be at its very best, as I'm sure they always want to be, to keep us safer, which is the key priority for me on your behalf, to deliver, to enhance, to add value to as your Police and Crime Commissioner. Chief Constable, at our last Compass, held on the 26th of June, I gave you a challenge to consider and respond at this meeting to some of the thematic concerns the public have. The first of which related to antisocial behaviour, where our communities say there is too low a response rate to antisocial behaviour, and also in that same regard to antisocial behaviour, where they feel that antisocial behaviour is growing and it does make people feel unsafe and uncertain. And they question why police are not more proactive and responsive to this. So, as I forewarned last time, they want to hear, and I'd welcome hearing for them your voice on what policing alone can do, as well as what you can do with partners to make early interventions that reduce escalation from antisocial behaviour, all that range from ASB to serious criminal activity and harm. So over to you. Where has your thinking taken you so far?
Well, I was really glad for that challenge last time, Commissioner, because as you know, we do a very great deal, both proactively and reactively. But as a result of your challenge back in June, I've done a review with the team internally over the summer as to what works and what we could do better and where we should put our attention. So we've had that review, and what that's done is really look to share across our districts and our neighbourhoods the great practice that works in some places and to get us to be really fast learners around the constabulary, but also with our partners, as you say, this is something that is greater than the police alone, albeit we take our role in it very, very seriously indeed. So we are both proactive and reactive, and I'll give you some examples of that. But really our focus from the police perspective, if there is real harm or vulnerability or real fear, as you've described, then we are very much taking that very seriously, and we want to resolve it and make it better. And often that means working backwards and working to identify the underlying causes often, and to try and stem those. So that means us working, as you know, with youth offending teams, with community safety partnerships, with the fire service, with the health service, with local authorities. The list goes on, and we all have a role in this statutorily as well as just being the right thing to do for the communities we all serve. There are some aspects, of course, that only the police can do. So there are some powers that only the police have, and we do use those, and I'll give you some examples of those. And often that can be helping get back to that root cause. But we can do dispersal orders, we can do community resolution. There's lots of formal things that the police can do. But sometimes this is rooted in mental health problems, sometimes it's rooted in substance abuse, sometimes it's rooted in homelessness, and often a combination of all of those. But to challenge back a little bit, what in terms of the antisocial behaviour reported to us, we have seen a slight decline in this year compared with last year. Slight, 5%. Previous year we had about 24,000, just shy of 24,000 cases reported to us, and the year that currently is 22.5. So it's a slight reduction, one not to perhaps shout too loudly about, but it is going certainly the right way. But I want to share a couple of examples just to bring to life your challenge about what the police only can do. So a gentleman in Aldershot, in his late 20s, he went to prison for 7 months last year, having been sentenced at Winchester Crown Court. And that's because he was repeatedly causing distress in public, heavy drinking in public, but also causing a lot of harm, causing a lot of fear in the town centre there, and lots of interventions by us, by the neighbour policing team, but also by local authority, just weren't working. And what we therefore do is we try and stop him, we try and help him find other ways, but we also build and compile, if you like, a case which is so compelling that we're then able to go to court, and we obtained a community behaviour order, which if then is breached, then someone has, potentially can go to prison, as happened in this case. You then get in the cycle, of course, if someone then comes back out again and it starts all over again, which is why my point of really trying to break whatever the root cause is in the long term the best effect. But certainly from the police perspective, we're not afraid of doing that, and we do that, and our neighbourhood policing teams are really good at it. Another example over the summer, which was long and hot. I know we've all forgotten that now, but a very long and hot summer. And in one area where we had a lot of young people congregating, enjoying the summer, yes, but also leaving a lot of litter, causing a lot of noise, a lot of disturbance. So we had our own staff out, we had our police community support officers, we had youth workers out, proactively looking for young people who we thought might end up that way. And about 100 of them we engaged together with local authority, with youth services, together to get them into a number of different classes and diversions, just to keep them doing other things and using their time positively rather than potentially negatively. And then another one where we've been working in Basingstoke with the Business Improvement District. And they, with us, are working on the civil law opportunities, and they've been really, really successful through the Business Improvement District in Basingstoke to put their own orders around people who are causing difficulty in outside their businesses and so on. And the police are there in support of that, and of course if someone breaches, then it comes to us and we can move into the criminal sphere. So there's a whole host of things that we do with others, but we know it's a problem and it's one we take seriously, but we do really focus our police attention on those where there's most vulnerability and most harm.
And is there something that's reassuring for the range of things that you do and quite a lot of things that you engage in? But there are two things I think the public want to hear more about is when the early indicators of antisocial behaviour come up, they report that it's too difficult for police to come. Are they hearing that directly from the local police teams, or are they reading too much into it? And how do you, is there something about how you triage to stop it at the root cause? How do you identify that? And what is it about reassuring people that their voice is heard?
Yep.
Even though on a particular case they may have expectations beyond what the operational stance can deliver immediately.
And I would expect us to be really, and I hope that we are really straight and transparent with people when they tell us, and they can either ring us, walk into one of our buildings, talk to one of our colleagues, tell us things online. There's a whole host of different ways that the public can tell us things. And I would hope that they are getting an acknowledgement to that. It may not be, as you say, we can whiz around now and do everything someone might like, but we're absolutely clear about what we can do and how this is helping, in many cases actually, building a bigger picture. Okay. And that takes a bit of time sometimes in order to build a picture that's sufficiently rich that we can do something about it.
Do your local teams report back up through the chain of command, and do you hear those pressures where people say it's not worth reporting?
Yes, they do. So every day on every district, and you'll I know you know this, but for those watching, our local policing, our neighbourhood policing is aligned with district and borough and city council boundaries. So we have, and that makes all this partnership stuff really work really well because we're coterminous. Every day in those districts, we will look every day at the ongoing problems that we've got, what antisocial behaviour is starting, what's very much ongoing, and where we need to put our attention and how we can best do that. And there are different levels, of course. So we are aware, that flushes up every day through that district process.
Okay. So your eye is on that ball, as are the local teams.
It is, but what we can't do is deal with all of it, unfortunately.
And you mentioned mental health, which is often an underlying issue for vulnerabilities and also for people's behaviours. Are you confident that in talking to partners the best people to deal with that understand the added pressure if they are unable to because of pressures on their resources, that you and your teams have to pick up the slack for that as the last people often surrounding people in those issues. Are you winning with partners conversations that actually reinforce the working together?
Certainly partners understand, but to give you a sense of the complexity, just in the acute mental health side, where often the police are dealing with someone who's in real acute crisis, there are 29 health agencies that we work with across our area. And that's a very complex picture. So whilst everyone understands, making change and affecting change in that kind of complexity is slow. So people are very willing, but it is slow. It's something I continue to put my personal attention and pressure into. There is more yet to do.
Good, okay, thank you. Last time as well, I raised some issues that the public had, and at the last campus, the Gosport War Memorial Hospital report had just come out.
Yes.
For that and for some broader sense of public confidence. When things don't go well, it reinforces those sort of issues for people in the short term. On the 26th of June, you gave an early response to the question, how are you planning to go about rebuilding public confidence in Hampshire Constabulary, and particularly what immediate reassurance to the public can you give? I'm wondering how that is going. What are you hearing with that particular event, and more generally about giving people appropriate confidence in you and your team?
Okay, so you're right. The last time we had this conversation, Commissioner, it was days, wasn't it, after the Gosport War Memorial Independent Panel published their report. And that report shone a light for so many families on the safety of patients in the wider health and social care system over decades. And showed so many of us, and my constabulary as part of that at that time, with nearly everyone else who touched those lives as being wanting in terms of the support they're given, and the report was very clear in that regard. So a number of facets to that. One is my position then, as now, and I explained last time, was to put those families first. And that's what I did. And as a result of that, the eastern police regions of 7 police forces have picked up and are now working with the panel regarding any further police investigations, such as there may be into those deaths. So it is entirely separate from Hampshire Constabulary. And I made that decision because we stand ready and stood ready and would now to investigate those deaths, and would do it really well. I know that. But the families involved, because of the journey they'd had for so very long, it was right to really listen to them and to ask someone else to do it. So that's what I've done. We, of course, are supporting that independent investigation in any way it needs, but it is for them to ask and certainly not for us to interfere. So that's how we're doing that. More locally, in terms of the wider confidence beyond those all-important families, actually I'm really heartened. The confidence in Gosport today and that environment is really supportive of local policing today, and I'm very grateful to Chief Inspector Sharon Woolrich, who's led that hugely ably. And we know that the support we have from that community is as strong today as it ever was, and I'm hugely grateful for that. And we've also taken a lot of effort to explain to our independent advisory group, to other community groups, why we've done what we've done, but also to explain to my own workforce, because they work today, they didn't work then, and I really wanted them to understand why that decision was made. So as I say, I'm very pleased that actually overall public confidence in us has not been dented. We have taken very seriously, what the panel said, and I think the two are not unconnected actually. We have always been transparent. We have shown everything we have to that panel. We've worked with them for years in the developing of their report. And that transparency, that openness, that acknowledgement of what we could have done better, I think takes us quite a long way, and is very honestly felt.
I know we were both very clear, and you've just reinforced that the constabulary today are in a very different place, with skills, with motivation, with modernisation. And sometimes the public see the risks from 20 years ago as being the same as today. Yeah. And that's not to say there aren't challenges today, but for this I absolutely reinforce that we're in a different place, and I'm really glad that the it will be others testing us, but you and your team supporting them fully and
Certainly.
Immediately.
Certainly.
Okay.
And we are, one of the most trusted police forces in the country, and I intend that we should stay
Yes.
there.
Yeah, good. We won't ask about what the scorecard looks like.
And I wouldn't tell you, Commissioner.
No, okay. I want to go on, it won't surprise you at all that one of my questions today is about local policing. We talk about it regularly because it's professionally appropriate to do so, but also because it is very much on the public's minds. All our communities are really concerned about. The policing landscape is a moving picture of demand and change needing to take advantage of technology to stay ahead of those who wish us harm and ensure you remain operationally effective for the future, you and your constabulary. A key part of the whole system approach includes a central contribution of local policing, essential to your operational plan and hugely valued by the public. And this local element has appeared difficult to sustain to the level the public wish to see, raising concerns about visible policing is how it's often described. Nationally and locally, you and colleagues in leadership in policing have been reviewing best practice to deliver safer in our local communities. I wonder if you could give the public some early indication of emerging conclusions and a sense of direction and what the future might look like for that.
No, I'm glad to, Commissioner, thank you. And your challenge to me, and we are in agreement that local policing is the bedrock of our policing model here. It is unique to the British policing model and something we're really proud of and something that we cherish. So that means, in practical terms, having dedicated constables, community support officers, special constables, volunteers within neighbourhoods. And as I said a moment ago, coterminous then with cities, districts and boroughs. So we can really have that day-to-day practical partnership with others who work in the same space as we do. So we are really committed, you and I, in our different ways to local policing. Local policing is focused on harm reduction. It was Robert Peel who said the absence of crime, the absence of harm is success. And that is by far the place that I would prefer us to be. And I would encourage us to think about local policing as a whole system. So very much as healthcare now is, actually. People consider the healthcare of their acute hospital, their local GP, their local services. It's very similar in the policing landscape. So it does incorporate that traditional community policing, which is important. Visibility, accessibility are a part of that. But that's not the whole thing. There is also the response policing, very local. If people really need us, we come and we come fast and we come very, very capably. Also those investigation teams, the people who in locality are investigating when crime has happened. We also have people in locality stopping and preventing harm in the first place. So we have people who deal with offenders and manage those to stop them reoffending, and a whole host of other work that we do to stop crime happening in the first place. We then have more broadly our joint operational unit, which we share with Thames Valley Police. They're working in our local areas now, on our roads, keeping them safe, keeping and denying criminals use of the roads in other ways. But we also have support from the regional and the national asset. So if in a neighbourhood, and I've seen them very recently talking with the neighbourhood team, they've got a particular tricky cyber crime or tricky digital crime to investigate, they can get tactical support from the National Crime Agency, from the regional setup. So it's very much a network approach. And I think one thing that I am very keen to try and have a bigger debate with the public around is that sense of how their policing is delivered nowadays in a way that is very different from how it was. But we do focus on what only the police can do, but we don't do that in isolation. And it does mean, therefore, to your point around local policing, I need to look very seriously at the blend of skills that the workforce have, the different powers that the workforce have. And that's something in detail that I'll be discussing with you over coming weeks. And then, of course, at subsequent meetings such as this, very happy to go into detail. But there's a number of options that we can talk about. But that point about purposefully moving towards harm reduction is stopping stopping, domestic abuse, stopping grooming of young people, stopping serious violence, which is a real concern of both of us. And that means putting our people in our workforce into early intervention, not just early in terms of years for young people, but early in terms of stopping something before it becomes a significant problem. Looking at adverse childhood experiences with partners and children's services, seeing where there is risk really, really early in a young person's life. And so our job there is to try and get upstream. I would much rather, and that's where local policing really is fantastic. It gets upstream and tries to stop problems before they become significant ones. And then there's a whole host of other things too, which are local policing. So your investment in our digital ability, so that people who want to engage with us in a local space purely online, if they want to, they can, and your investment in that is fantastic. And also our work with the fire service and with other blue light services. We can all be the eyes and ears of one another in locality. So there's a whole host of different ways that we deliver local policing. It needs to move with the times, but that isn't anything, in my view, to be afraid of. It means we're actually better prepared for the challenges of today.
There are a couple of particular questions that the public ask. The first is an issue of when there's a request for help by whatever means, and that help arrives having travelled a long way from the local area. Are we making clear to the public the value of the fastest response and the changes operationally that you may change how the public see policing but improve the response? Do you think that is landing with the public?
I mean, I haven't received that feedback. My sense is what my experience and what the information I have tells me is that if the public really need our help, they would love it to be fast and really, really effective. Whatever that is, whether that's responding, whether that's a firearms need, whatever that need may be. And that is where we endeavour to be when one is talking about emergency response. Come quickly, come and do a great job for me. That is what people want. Whereas it's the more enduring relationship that relies and is right to rely upon the neighbourhood policing team, where you've got a longer relationship, and that enduring relationship with the public is separate.
Do you think the public have been taken with you and colleagues on the journey of the deployability of the response teams, and therefore if a vehicle arrives or people arrive from some distance, the control, this is me answering on your behalf, so please, if you could give some sense to the public that if you're in the south and someone arrives from Basingstoke, it is as likely, can you reassure us, it's as likely that's the fastest response
Absolutely.
set up to do that. It's not, and then, so first of all, is that, am I saying
right.
that right?
You are right, and the mind's eye picture for that is, and we don't do it with sticks and like in the Second World War, with sticks and ships on a map, but it is the equivalent of that. So we know where all of our fast cars and our response people are, and we then move the nearest unit, the nearest person to that, depending on what everyone else is doing. Okay. So it's similar to the ambulance service. They do the same. You move your people around in order to keep your coverage and be ready to get wherever you need to get.
It seems to me that for some at least, and they find their way to me in numbers and to other people who report it, that message of what the best deployment arrangements are feels different to what the history of it or the public perception of it is. Is there something that you and your teams can do to make that point, whilst acknowledging if there is a delay for whatever reason, that's not masked by...
No, and a delay, there isn't a delay issue in that. I mean, I think one of the things is having this kind of conversation, because actually what I'm delighted to say is that most people have no need to call the police at all, ever. Actually that is the reality of the great safe place we all live in, that people don't have a lived experience of us. And I'm very glad that they don't, because they don't need us. But when they do, they can absolutely be reassured that we deliberately put our people geographically and on at the right times of the day and days of the week to meet the demand. And we are very, very good at managing and predicting the demand that comes our way. So we do, we're very light on our feet in rearranging ourselves to meet that.
And I think getting better at understanding that, I hope, because we're investing in it. But,
absolutely.
Yeah. Good. The other question that people often ask is, it's all very well having a local team nominally, but they're pulled away to somewhere else. There's a debate at the moment about how that can be protected. Yeah. Are you confident that you operationally can ensure enough local resources retained, not quite absolutely, notwithstanding what other the pressures there are, but are there ways that you can protect that resource staying local, or are they drawn away more than you might be comfortable with?
I think there's three aspects to that. One is probably more than I am comfortable with, but the other aspects are, there have been events, and happy to talk about those a little bit later this summer, where actually it has been all hands to the pump, and therefore we have moved people away. We have explained that, and we have rung people up, partners up, and explained why we're having to do that. But it is in extremis, and we had a couple of in extremis events this summer. More generally, though, that is one of the reasons why I referred to looking at the skill set and the powers and the blend of those within the neighbour policing teams. Because the reality is that police officers, I'm quite reasonable, but I can ask them to go and work anywhere, anytime. I can require them to do that. As I say, I am reasonable, and I try not to do that and abuse that. For police community support officers, though, I can't, because their terms and conditions are really different. And actually that protects that offer, because it means that them staying within their environment, within their neighbourhood, within the town that they know for a period actually reaps the rewards that we both want. So actually that mitigates to an extent the chance that could happen. We look every day on a tactical level, twice a day, at where our people are, what they're doing, and we make choices accordingly. Longer term, I'm really conscious of keeping people in post long enough to create relationship, to make a difference, and to put the effort in that they can see the difference they're making too. But yes, there are times when I've not been able to achieve that, and I regret those, but they have been necessary.
Okay. In the course of this question and your answers, we've acknowledged a review that's taking place. Yeah. If you are currently a local policing asset working, and there's a review about your work in the normal way of conversation, you'll be very curious and interested in the results. Yeah. You've recently reassured me that no decisions, and I'm clear, no proposals have come to me yet. Should the public would you reinforce for the public that this is a deliberate review, that they'll be kept in touch with what the impact is? Yes. And are you comfortable that your team are alert to that, because they are reputation makers locally? Absolutely. So if they're unsettled, that would be unhelpful.
I'm very much aware of that, and the local district commanders, the local chief inspectors, and my expectation then is that they speak with their teams and tell them what we know, and also tell them what we don't know yet, because often myth busting is really important in this space too. It really depends on the funding envelope, and I don't want to get into the funding conversation now, but that really does depend upon that, because there are choices to be made on what's affordable. But it's a conversation you and I should have first of all.
And people will hear what your professional advice is in plenty of time.
Absolutely.
You used a phrase that I'm familiar hearing a lot: adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Is there anything about that three-letter acronym that may be new to some people, why that's suddenly such a key part of most conversations?
So adverse childhood experiences are new-ish to policing. They're absolutely not new, though, to public health, to education system. And in a nutshell, what it means is if a young person grows up with a number of things, so living in a home with domestic abuse, being hungry, having a parent or a carer who's suffering with real mental health problems, a whole host of things, then actually the cards life has dealt you are tougher. And what that means is if someone has more than 4 of those, and there's a list about 15, 20 long, then the chances of them being subject to crime, being an offender, suffering mental health problems later, having addictions, having difficulty forming relationships, all of that, is more likely. It's not absolute, but it's more likely. The way of countering it, and again, this same work that public health and education have known for a long time, is there are some really simple things that can build resilience in a young person to stop that becoming a path that is followed. And there are really simple things like having an adult who's looking out for you. It sounds so simple, but actually we know that there are often so many young people who don't have an adult looking out for them. And then the cards are stacked against them. So what we're doing with public health, with education, with children's services is trying to work out from all the shared information that we all have, who are the young people who are more likely, not saying they will, but more likely to take that path and suffer those consequences, so we can do something about it.
Okay, good. And so the public can expect to hear that, and now they've heard from you why that's a relevant thing to be thinking about. I make no apology for coming back to public confidence.
Yes.
Public confidence in policing is often impacted by the press and media reports, which appear occasionally, I might even say often, to only report part of a story. In the last few weeks, 4 murders have been publicly reported and commented on. Lucy McHugh in Southampton, Courtney Jones in Totton, Michael Deary in Fareham and Zubin Wang in Brockenhurst. There is a standard response in lots of occasions that while an investigation is going on, it's not appropriate to talk about them in public. But can you talk a little bit about the pressure challenge of the public hearing public statements in the press and on the news and wherever against the reassurance or context giving for things that will unsettle people?
No, absolutely, Commissioner. And all homicides are of course publicly reported and should be. And each of those 4 people whose names you've given, they're all dearly missed, very greatly loved by friends and family, and they've had horrors within their lives in recent weeks. So each and every one is a tragedy. Each of those 4 is very different from one another. And as you say, I won't comment on any detail because they're all 4 under current investigation and all 4 have criminal justice proceedings. And I know you're not asking me to comment on them. From a policing perspective and from a public reassurance perspective, we, from this constabulary, have responded to each and every one really, really well. We have thrown everything at it, the whole system response, as I said earlier in response to a different question, a really strong, a really diligent response, both in terms of the investigations, which of course in each of them are still ongoing, but also in terms of making sure that we are able to reassure, yes, those direct family, but also the wider community so that they know what's going on and they know that it's in good hands and that they can trust us to do that. It has implications, you're right, it was very unusual to have all of those in such quick succession, but we did mobilise. We are really good at mobilising, and we mobilise as a constabulary, and no stone in any of those has been left unturned, and I want to reassure people around that. And we also have brilliant volunteers who also mobilise. So we have volunteers who turn out in the middle of the night to start searching areas for all sorts of evidence and things like that. And they come out, and I salute each one of those. I'm really proud of the response this summer for those 4 awful tragedies. We're also, though, supported, and again I hope to reassure, wider than the constabulary itself. So we've had our regional organised crime unit colleagues helping us investigate. We've had the National Crime Agency helping us investigate, not just with investigators, but also with very specific tactics that they have. So this whole system approach, as I described, to policing. I'm also very grateful to my fellow Chief Constables because for the first time from this constabulary we asked for what's called mutual aid, where we ask other forces to come and give us some people to help. And we needed particularly investigators because those were all concurrent, and also help people search some large areas for evidence and so on. And every chief I asked gave some people up, and they were busy too, so I'm hugely grateful to my peer Chief Constables for that, because this has been an exceptionally busy summer, not just for Hampshire, but also across the UK. So what I've described is a very strong, a brilliant response after each of those tragedies struck. but I would much rather they hadn't struck in the first place. And the comments I'll make now, Commissioner, are not about any one of them, of those cases at all. They are they are general comments. We have not seen an increase in homicides in our area. What we have seen is an increase in the most serious violence. And actually, people stay alive now because we have fantastic paramedics, when in years gone by, those same injuries may well have resulted in somebody's death. So we do have a real increase in the most serious violence. And I'll give you a sense of scale. So April to April, so the April just finished, we had about 500 of the most serious violence reported to us. The year before, it was about 375. So that's nearly a third increase. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. A lot of what's in the national media now is around the carrying of knives and use of weapons. We do see that. We do see people carrying knives at a scale they didn't before. And what happens then sometimes is when people used to have a fight with their fists, they now have a knife in their pocket and they use it. So actually the same fight as was has much more serious consequences now because someone has got a weapon with them and then they use it because it's there. So that flash to bang, if you like, has really shrunk and that concerns me greatly. So we have had a real increase in serious violence here. And you're leading the way on the serious violence strategy, working across our 4 upper tier authorities, working with health and so on, and you're leading that, and I'm really grateful because I think we all realise, do we not, that we have to do something very serious about this. And from the police perspective, we are putting our effort across all 4 areas of that national serious violence strategy, which is about that county lines drug use. It's about supporting communities in local partnerships. It is law enforcement, and that's our part as well. And then early intervention, linked to what I said earlier. And there is, I think next week, there's a national Operation Sceptre, which is being led by the National Crime Agency, but all police forces as well. And we will play our part in really trying to stop people carrying knives, to understand the consequences of doing it, to go after those that are preying on others and to try and get...
So just to be clear, Sceptre is the
name of the
intervention
operation.
For the operation to deal with knives.
Yes,
right,
so forgive me, the Operation Sceptre is the name of the National Crime Agency national operation that they are leading, that all police forces have a role in. Yeah, thank you. And we are very much linked in with that. And then the final bit on the most serious violence that again has been in the very much in the news of late is around stop and search. And again and I know we've talked about this before, but in the Constabulary we have not reduced our numbers of stop and search in the ways that in other parts of the country have been reported. They've plummeted. They never have here. There's a whole reason for that, which is we have always, I think, used it wisely and well. It's a very precious power for policing. And I'm a real supporter of it as a power, but we should hold it very lightly in our hands. So we have body-worn video, so we show that body-worn video of those stops and searches to groups of people all around the force area, so we're very transparent. We look at the disproportionality, we make sure we target our use of it. But that is a real tool in us preventing serious violence, and it's one that we hold dearly. But as I say, we have a lot of scrutiny around that and so on. So it is unusual to have had 4 homicides in such a short period, but they are all so different from one another, each in their own case, as I say, really tragic. We are doing a great job, but also I would much rather they hadn't happened in the first place.
You make the point, and I reinforce the thanks to your colleagues for providing mutual aid.
Yeah.
You made the point it's the first time for ever. Is that indicative of the busyness of the period at the moment, or is that indicative of something else about the growing demand? A bit of both, maybe. I don't know. What is your feel for that? I mean, thank them for their help, yes, but
it's both. And you know, this summer the demand was exceptional, and I'm happy to talk about that. If you wanted me to do that now, I can discuss the summer and the demand.
I think that's the next question, demand. So that's a sort of, it leads into it. You said earlier just now, and I like no surprises, so the general theme of these questions, you know roughly where I'm going to go, but It has been unprecedented for parts of it, and as a result, your team have been stretched towards their limits and have responded valiantly, and my thanks to them and all of those who were impacted by their extra hours, by their extra energy and their immediate contribution to keeping people safer. For this year's settlement into next year, you presented your plans to me, which included savings of £10 million broadly in efficiencies, alongside the pressures of what we needed to modernise and to keep us ahead of those that wish us harm. You assured me that the Constabulary would still be able to provide a minimum service and respond to the most urgent calls from the public. As I hear that sentence from you for the first time, we needed to call mutual aid, as you've acknowledged that it's been particularly busy, and there may be other pressures too. Has the risk level dialed up? Are you still able to deliver that promise of responding to the greatest threats and risks of harm and an appropriate professional response by your team, as you need to advise me and I regularly encourage you to do? Where are you at on that scale at the moment?
Close. So 18 months ago, you and I both said together that the £10 million that we're saving in a year, and we're on track to do that, we could do through a mixture of efficiencies and also stopping doing some things that were less significantly important. And we've done that. And as a result, we, I think, to answer your main question, are absolutely able to meet our most serious calls. We're certainly always there in emergencies. We're able to maintain some proactivity as well as responding. So I professionally feel that we are there, but they're just about. And we said that's what we felt. This summer has been extraordinary. Not just in Hampshire, but across the UK. I mean, just in July of this year, we had 5,000 more 999 calls here in July compared to July last year. And July last year wasn't quiet either, and that was an increase on the year before. So the volume of work certainly is increasing, and that was felt around the country. But then you add on top of that, as we've just talked about, those homicide investigations. We had the first fortnight in July, we had our colleagues just over the border in Wiltshire, a huge support from us, of course, as you would hope and expect, regarding the second Novichok incident. Was the same fortnight as the Sweden match, and then the Croatia match was the same fortnight as President Trump came to visit. It is the same policing that does all those things. So it was an extraordinary time, and we just had a royal wedding, which was a wonderful celebration, but an enormous, the biggest policing operation, I think, in peacetime. So, just to give a sense of scale, and we were involved heavily in all of those things, and it is the same people that do all of these things. So we met them, we did them, but it did mean that we needed to do some reorganisation. So what that meant in practice was that some of our proactive work, I redeployed that into the reactive work. So that's where those choices are made and how that happens in practice. We're always reassessing the serious crime versus the volume crime in terms of where we can put our attention. That is a daily balance, and we do that in a threat, risk and harm way, not in a crime type way. We've also done some really fundamental things. So we are always busy in the summer. People love to come to Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Of course they do in the summer, and we love that they do. So we need to make sure that we've got as many people at work as we possibly can. So really simple things like making sure that training that is an annual event happens in the autumn and the winter. We make sure that we have more people available from, if we can bring others in from other departments, we will for the summer. We make sure that some people, of course, need to have summer holidays off with their families. I absolutely get that. But we keep that to a level that's manageable. And then if we can't, we give them a letter if they want to explain to their school, and that's a matter then for the school. So we try and plan for this as well as we possibly can. I feel this summer, whilst we're doing a debrief of it now, my sense is that we did that pretty well. There will be learning. We will look to learn and spin it again for next year. The volunteers, though, as well, are really worth mentioning because they are fantastically flexible and very generous of their time. So they will often come at very short notice where we really need them if something springs up. So our special constables, the search teams I've talked about, our volunteer search teams, our cadets, neighbourhood watch, the list goes on. So we use all of those as widely and effectively as we can. So as I say, we will debrief it. For the first time, just before the August bank holiday, and it was the time we had asked for mutual aid from other forces, because we'd had 3 of those 4 homicides and the 4th happened on the bank holiday weekend. We, for the first time, wrote a contingency plan for if we get too close now in terms of volumes of emergency calls or any, many more really significant incidents happening, what will moving back to a core delivery service mean for us? To my knowledge, I don't think any other police force has done that, and there was quite a lot of interest from my peers to understand that. Thankfully, we didn't have to enact it. We did not put it into practice. But I think the public would expect us to plan for a contingency, which is what we did. So we could really think through in slightly slower time what we would need to do if we were really pushed to that extent. But as I say, thankfully, it didn't happen. But it was the first time in my professional career that we've had to get that close.
Is that, as you know, I push quite a lot for that forward look and having processes to look about recovery. If we surge, how do we recover? Yeah. I find it slightly counterintuitive that that's not embedded in the organisation. Is that because previously the resources could be managed more locally? Is that pressure greater now?
It's not. No, I wouldn't say it was anything to do with them being managed locally. In fact, having them managed, at scale means we are able to flex much more quickly and much more effectively, in my view. My sense is because we are already, through your challenge into us, really efficient already, and HMIC, our inspectorate, tell us so we are already really efficient, and I'm really clear that every public pound should be spent as wisely as it possibly can and stretched as far as it can. And we do that, and we are forward-leaning about, there's still 5,000 of us, we can still do an awful lot, and we do. But actually, when you put all those things together of football and visits and royal weddings and terrorist incidents and festivals and everything that happened, as well as a general significant uplift in routine 999 calls, if there is such a thing as a routine 999 call, it was beyond, it was beyond our planning. It was beyond anyone's planning across the UK. So what I'm confident of, though, is that the work that happened before my time, so all credit to my predecessors, which set this constabulary up to operate in the way that it does, meant that we were able to weather this really well, and I think we did.
So the tuning and the flexibility of the team, well done in a difficult and demanding time. So. Whether at some point is there a need to reduce some of the expectations the public have of some things that you used to be able to do as a constabulary and no longer can? Or are there some things that you have had to stop that the public may have noticed and seen that reduction? Yes, and through your work, through the district commanders, through my own work, I hope that is being heard, but in a way that is very much focusing on what we can deliver. There is still a really good policing offer to be had here. It is just a different one. So focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't. But certainly I make sure that people like our local MPs have a lot of detail, because they also get a lot of questions, as do leaders and other local politicians, so that we give them the information so that they can feel informed about where we are and what we're doing. Profiling of crime has changed, so there's an awful lot of crime that happens online now in a way that it didn't 10 years ago, less than that in some areas. We've seen an uplift in serious violence. We've seen an uplift in sexual offending. We talk often about fraud. There's a huge amount that has changed in the profile of what the police must do and are good at doing and are determined to do. And actually that means that certain other things, unless they have a policing purpose, actually are less likely to happen. Not saying they won't happen at all, but they're less likely to happen. We have about 160,000 crimes reported to us every year. And 60,000 of those are dealt with very, very capably and ably, but only within the resolution centre, which is online and on the phone. And we know actually that has a really good satisfaction rate, because the people who use that and report and their crime is dealt with there, we're really straight with them. We explain what we can and what we can't do.
But there has been, to the point I made just now, when we've been dealing with the specifics of this summer, I've had to redeploy some of our neighbourhood PCSO, some of our neighbourhood officers, some of our proactive teams into things like managing scenes. We've had a lot of scenes to manage whilst we've gathered evidence, and sometimes that takes some time. We've also wanted to work with the public to reassure them, to explain what's happened, to try and find witnesses and to support those witnesses coming forward. And of course that inevitably means there's less time for patrol, for more general engagement. So it is increasingly targeted, but I'm confident we target towards the best way. But there is a conversation to be had about it.
In the review of local policing, local safety, will, for example, scene guarding be included in that review as to whether there are other ways to do that outer perimeter than using really valuable resources, using only a very small subset, important subset of their skills to actually protect the scene?
Indeed. So yes, and we have looked at that. So there are different schools of thought. So actually being on protecting a scene, certainly to begin with, is an investigative capability. Sometimes people come back to a scene. So or people might have seen something and will come back to a scene. So actually the people standing on that cordon are investigators. So they need to know who's approaching them, they need to be able to reassure them, find out who they are.
Don't presume it's just standing there and stopping people.
It's far from it.
Yes.
Far from it. But as time goes on, that side comes up.
You mentioned MPs as key contributors, and they get a lot of casework. There are two examples that I wanted to hear a sort of general response to from you. The first was from Kit Malthouse MP for North West Hampshire. He wrote to me saying, in strong language, as MPs sometimes use, he is at a loss to understand why PCSOs haven't been redistributed following the reduction of them within Tess Valley. And Mims Davis, the MP for Eastleigh, forwarded a complaint representative of both Kit Malthouse's and Mims's representative of the sort of questions that come up, not infrequently, but these are two particular, forwarded a complaint that a constituent as to why the police would allow a group of gypsy and travellers to travel off in their vehicles which were not taxed. The complainant reportedly had checked this online with DVLA in that way that modern people do. In those sort of questions that go to MPs, go to people of interest, I'm sure they arrive in your office occasionally, as they do mine, as they do via 101, as the rest of it. How do those land for, how do we triage those? How do you engage with those sort of questions?
We don't triage them, we deal with each and every one. So an MP's question into me, or sometimes they come to you and I'll supply you with the operational side of it. We take each and every one very seriously. It's a real part of our democracy. And we're a monopoly public service provider, so it's right, always, that we should answer the questions of democratically elected MPs. So we take each and every one really seriously. On the specifics, they have both had an answer, and that's important to say. In terms of police community support officers, and it references back to one of our earlier conversations today, we are doing a proper look at local policing and that blend of skills and powers that colleagues need. And therefore, some people have left their role as PCSOs naturally because they've gone on to other things. Some of them have become police constables, some have gone to do other things, some have retired. So there has been that natural kind of hiatus, unfortunately, where we've needed to kind of pause on recruiting whilst we work out the exact numbers. So I appreciate in some areas that's been more difficult than others. There's also the issue, though, that one cannot, and it's the plus point that I said before about maintaining PCSOs in their own area, is that I can't move them around, willy-nilly. It is down to, their employment contract, where they work. Of course, some are willing to move, but some aren't. So that is something that needs to be done by negotiation. On the point around traveller encampment, it's a perpetual balancing act for policing. You'll be aware that in our area there are no sites for travellers to go to, which is a local authority responsibility, and we've talked about that before, but there aren't any. And traveller groups will say that to us, that they don't feel, and there isn't anywhere within our area for them to go. From a policing perspective, our job is to balance the rights and responsibilities of all parties. And the example that was in that letter regarding people driving off with without any tax on their vehicle, absolutely yes. I have looked into it so when you sent the letter through, and I support the decision was made. Those are people's homes, and there are often children in those homes. And for us to seize a vehicle, which we have the power to do, but we can only use powers if they are proportionate and necessary. They're not absolute. And in those cases, they were leaving willingly, they were leaving calmly, they were leaving at the request of the landowner, supported by us and others. Therefore, to seize their home would have been too much. So that is why, on that occasion, we did not. What I can say, on another example today, we've had another encampment elsewhere in the Constabulary area, up in Fleet initially, and then moved across to Andover. And we set up an operation last night, ready to do that today, because actually in that place, the traveller encampment, they were making local people very nervous, people were feeling vulnerable, they'd caused some damage and so on. So having been asked to go by the landowner, which is always really crucial, the landowner must ask someone to leave. We were actually going to go and require them to leave with the landowner, with the local authority this morning. Thankfully, having seen all our vans lined up, they've chosen to go off their own accord, which is often the case, and that's great. So I share those two examples because they're almost two different extremes. Our job in the police service is to balance that. It doesn't mean always that we please everybody, but it is our job to balance the rights of both those who are gypsy and rainbow travellers, and those who are in the landowner, and those in the community. And it's often quite a delicate balancing act.
You will know that in advance of these Compass sessions, I advertise to the public and seek their questions that if they were here, that they would ask you. I weave those into the questions that we've been asked and answered, and so they're often thematic and topical. Occasionally there's a particular question that comes up that someone is very keen to ask, and I have one of those for you today. This question from a member of the public introduces it by saying, a friend of my daughter went to the police after being visited by bailiffs for a debt she had no idea about, owed to the mobile phone company O2. It appears someone had used her details, and she found out who it was in the course of her own investigations. So the best part of the job of the police has been done, yet her impression was that they had no interest. And the questioner goes on to pose a question in that context. So my question is, what crimes are Hampshire Police interested in, as identity theft and fraud are clearly not on the list?
Well, they are on the list. And certainly, if that person, and I don't know who it is, Commissioner, of course, if they'd be willing, I'd be very happy to have a look at that particular case, because certainly, if we do know who someone is on the end of that, then I would expect us to at least have a look at it and let the person who suffered it know what's going to happen. So I would expect different from that. More generally, we do take identity fraud and fraud more widely really seriously. It is a huge problem. Just this week, I've heard of 3, just in my own going around in different police stations this week, so there's lots more than that, 3 different situations, both romance fraud, banking fraud, where people are being walked, elderly people sadly too often being walked into a bank and asked to take money out, and the banking protocol, whereby the people who work in the banks are the eyes and ears and spot that doesn't look right and call us, has worked brilliantly and fantastically. I'm really pleased about that, but sometimes, of course, a lot of money has already gone before someone comes our way. So there are some really simple things. Much as we've been discussing in other areas, I would much prefer this didn't happen at all. And I think all of us have got used to locking our doors and shutting our front doors and putting our bags in the boot of our car, and yet our online presence is really insecure. So there are some really simple things, both as private individuals and as perhaps small enterprises, that we can do. It's really simple stuff, but not enough of us do it. So about having, decent firewalls, good antivirus stuff, pass phrases, not passwords anymore, pass phrases, which are much harder to crack. changing the default on your router at home, never just keeping the password that's on the router. Really simple stuff, which is akin to locking your windows and shutting your front door when you go to bed. So we are really committed to doing what we can. It is an enormous and burgeoning problem. There is a national coordinator called Action Fraud, which is refreshing itself, and there'll no doubt be a lot of media around it from Action Fraud later this year. But they're the ones to go to often, and they will give out good advice. And there's lots on their website for people to check in with. But they will gather that information, and if it's solvable or if it's part of a pattern, then they will send that back to us as a local police force, as they do with others around the country. And that Action Fraud Hub is the place nationally where that happens. And the reason it happens nationally is because often these are connected internationally. They're connected in certain areas of the country. They're connected with certain businesses, certain types of attacks. Certain banks will be suffering certain things at certain times. So you can't do that on a local basis. You have to do it on a larger one. And that's why they do that as a national centre for all of us. But we also are very proactive. So one of the things that happens is particularly elderly people can be defrauded. They can be lured through post, through phone calls and that kind of thing. So we do a lot of visits to very elderly people, and anyone who is worried about someone, we can go and visit. But also, if you're worried about your own parent or an elderly neighbour, then there's lots of stuff on the Operation Signature website which can help you just give some really simple advice. But we visited over 1,000 people in the last 12 months, just having that conversation with them. We do loads of road shows around fraud to try and help keep people safe. And then that point around that banking protocol has really reaped evidence. And I was with a sergeant only on Monday or Tuesday of this week who was telling me about the banking protocol having worked really well. He'd been called by the neighbour of a very elderly man who had already sadly sent thousands of pounds worth of money, thinking that there was someone in love with him in another country. And then he went into the bank to send more, and the bank knew that didn't look right and did something about it, which was fantastic. So it won't get his money back, but it stops it getting any worse.
So I hope our questioners heard three parts of an answer. The first is to reassure that identity theft and fraud are on your agenda in the way that you've described. Secondly, and helpfully, that if that person wants to pursue it and is willing to share the details, that you could review that and engage with that person. The third bit, though, may land very strongly, as it does with some people, and they do express that, the sense that her impression was they had no interest when
I'm sorry,
it
that's
was
the
first
case.
reported. I mean, that's clearly at second hand. Is anything, if someone feels that they should particularly be doing to help them, and also if there's an occasion when that's an appropriate impression, that we can learn from that as well? Oh,
absolutely. And that's why I would never want someone to be left with that impression. We can't always do that everything somebody would want, and I don't know in this particular case, of course. We can't always do everything that someone would want, but I would absolutely expect that they understand and have had it explained in a way that is certainly respectful of their situation, and we're able to leave them certainly knowing that we've taken it seriously, and what we are and what we're not going to be doing with it next. So there's no uncertainty around that.
And there's a process to raise that.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's findable on the website and things like that. Good, okay. Thank you. This won't be the first and probably won't be the last time that I test something about prioritisation and return to the theme of what policing and any policing can do. You say occasionally that 80% of your resources are not directly related to crime because they're about the prevention and about other community engagement. You've been talking about the value of the partnerships for adverse childhood experiences and a wide range of other things that you do. But if 20% of your operational demand is directly related to crime, and we are under some demand pressures and other issues that the public would like us to dial up, like policing to dial up, what positive difference to crime outcomes, which are the first concern of the public, would be delivered by increasing your allocation from 20% directly related to crime to 30%?
That's a really hard question to answer. So Certainly 20% of the calls that we get relate directly to crime, which is perhaps the more accurate way that I can answer that. So to give it a sense of scale, we get about 1 million calls into us a year and about 160,000 crimes. So that gives you some sense. So that's where I think that figure comes from. As you say, we spend an awful lot of time and effort making sure that crime doesn't happen, and that is around the early intervention side of things we've talked about, as well as the local proactivity, but it's also things like planning for the big events. You know, people come and have a fantastic festival, 40,000 people in one place. We work hugely carefully with the organisers to make sure everyone has a great time and goes home safely. So lots and lots of effort goes into things like that. But I'm not saying that all those other calls are not police business. So when the motorways, you know, if something happens on a motorway, we get lots and lots of calls about the same thing. Of course, that's police business. It's about the wider mission of keeping people safe. Also about when, you know, someone's missing, if they're worried about a loved one who's gone missing, that's absolutely police business. It's our job to help keep people safe. So our work is about helping communities keep safe, of which crime is a part. And that's probably a clearer way for me to describe that. We are always good at responding to emergencies. We are always good at investigating the most serious, the most complex crimes. And then beyond that, our resources are available for proactivity, for engagement and the kind of things we've been talking about. But always with a preference that the crime doesn't happen in the first place. So that's more than a numbers game, and I know you know that, and we talk about this often. We need as many people, but it's not just about the numbers of people, it's about how productive they are, it's how resilient they are, it's how well connected with data, with information, with digital tools that they can have, so the time they spend is time really well spent. So I can't put a 30% figure on it, and I can't, and I have tried to put a figure around what crime outcomes would mean. What I know is that if we can get upstream, we can stop crimes happening so that we don't even have 20% of the calls into us being about crime, then we are together making our community safer, and it leaves more and more headspace, more time for the wider proactivity, the wider engagement, the wider reassurance. So it's not a binary choice, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It is a complex one. But certainly getting upstream and stopping that is a big part of our job.
So far so good in answering what's meant to be a challenging call, doing what policing and only policing can do. Is there, because police, that whole family of officers and specials and PCSOs and staff and all of those who volunteer with us tend to self-select as people who are able to do things. Do we get drawn into other people's business at the risk of what we should focus on? And hence my questioning to you, not only here, but regularly, is at a time when demand is high, at a time when pressures are growing and change is happening, focusing the constabulary on with the right emphasis on what they and only they can do, and ensuring that relationship with others, that we don't get drawn into things we shouldn't. Is that something we can improve without losing the relationships with partners, losing our footprint in the community?
You're right, absolutely, in that it's one of those things that from a policing perspective, we are full of people who are very forward-leaning, who roll their sleeves up and get things done, who are invariably really good at getting things done. And that's often what draws them to work with us and for us. And sometimes we can be our own worst enemy in that sense. And it's a conversation I'm having with my colleagues a lot, because I want us to keep the promises we make. So what we say we're going to do, and we do it really well. But we are also not going to fill the gaps that others have left behind, because actually that creates risk for us. We shouldn't be taking on other people's risks that actually we may not be skilled or with the right tools or understanding to do properly. And that actually in the long run can be a problem. But from a colleague perspective, that's quite difficult, because the people who work for policing, they want to do the very best they can. People join the police to make a difference. Whenever I see colleagues when they're leaving us after a long career, they say the same thing, and that stayed with them. That vocation, that public service purpose stays with them. and they want to do the very best they can. And what I'm having to say to them sometimes is, do enough, do proportionately enough, but let me take the burden of, if we can't do that, that's my problem, not yours. But there is an ongoing debate. We have great partnerships in our area, you know that, and you drive many of them. And actually, we are all trying to point the right way and the same way, which is making our communities safer. I'm very clear on what the policing purpose and the policing mission is. I'm very clear on the extent of our role. And I will never, just abandon and leave a partner out to dry, nor do I expect them to give me that kind of work too. So I expect us to work it through. And actually, that's how it operates around here, and that's how we get things done.
Thank you for that. It seems right to me. I have a couple of thank yous to make and a challenge to give you for next time. Okay. I rather like setting you a challenge, I've decided. I hope you like receiving them.
Always.
I'll do that as the last thing we do, but a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you for your answers to the questions today. It's really important that members of the public have heard your operational voice as Chief Constable. Part of the purpose of this is to me to fulfil my role of questioning you, for them to see that happening and for them to hear in your voice what is absolutely your responsibility, the operational prioritisation and the choices that you make, some indication of how those choices are made. So thank you for that. I'd like to also thank all of those who submitted questions, and I hope you've got value from the answers, and do give us your feedback if you want to about these Compass sessions. I want very specifically, and it's come up a number of times, you have quite rightly thanked all of those who volunteer, and I want to add a general thanks to all of those of your team who do go several extra miles, do continue to provide motivation, professional skill that supports keeping us safer. So for all the volunteers, for the widest sense of the police family, and through you, Chief Constable, I want to say thank you for what you've been doing, and I know will continue to do to keep us safer on the work every day. And particularly because you made the emphasis to recognise not only do we value the volunteers who come to support us, but how important they are for their contribution to keeping us all safer. So thank yous all round. Please pass them on to your team, and those of you who are watching, please take them if it's for you. As I did last time, though, I want to leave with a challenge for next time. At the December Compass, that's this meeting, the title of this meeting, lots of acronyms, OPTHIS. So the Compass meetings, as well as any seasonal and topical issues that might come up, I'd like to have a focus on the concerns from our business communities, and particularly relate to the vulnerabilities for both the businesses and their customers. Today we had one example submitted by a member of the public about a fraud that impacted both business and a customer, placing both at some risk. In December, I'd like to hear your thoughts on protecting commercial activity and all of those engaged with it that create economic viability and sustainability for our communities. And I'll be keen to hear from the public of their questions and concerns in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.